editing a panoramic image taken with the Mavic 2 Pro. In today's video, I'm going to look at the entire workflow for creating the image that you see on screen now. This image was shot with the Mavic 2 Pro, and it's a series of 6 images stitched together in Lightroom, then taken into Photoshop for a small cleanup, then taken into Luminar, then into Camera Raw filter, and then back into Lightroom. It could all be done in Luminar except for the photo merge, so I just thought I'd let you see my workflow for putting this image together. There is other Skylum software that edits drone photos, but my preference for this style of image is Luminar 4.3, so I'll just let you see how all the software come together to realise the final image. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Okay, we're in Lightroom just now, and this is the first part of the process, and these are 6 images from the Mavic Pro 2. It was just a panel shot, and each shot, if you're doing a panel shot, as you know, try and keep a third of the previous frame in. So I have went through these, and it's slightly more than a third for some of them, but I hadn't done this in a wee while with the drone, so I thought I'd go for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of slight adjustments here, and the first one is I'm going to bring back the highlights slightly, so you see this warming up in here. I'm going to lift the shadows, and the settings, as you can see, it was ISO 200 f6.3, and I'm also going to dehaze it slightly. It was a lovely sunset, but not too much. That might even be just too much there, just to around there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift and select the other images so that I'm working from the same edits with everything, and then go over and press Sync. And the pop-up box asking me what I want to do, and everything there is okay. Click Synchronize. So all of these images now have the same edits. Okay, from here what I'm going to do is select all, holding down Shift, go up into Photo, and then Photo Merge, and then Panorama, and there you go. That was really quick actually. And I'm also going to do the boundary warp, or just to fill in the edges. I could do fill edges if I want, but I'm not so keen on that effect, so I'm just going to take the boundary warp for this one. I am going to take it up to 100 to see what happens, and that looks okay at that, so I'm going to click Merge. So that's us done the first part of the process. And the next part for me for the step in here, if you noticed that in the screen before, I had a slight sun flare on the sea. So as you can see, I've already done this one before. And this is the edit I got previously after running it through Photoshop and then into Luminar. So we're going to work from this base here. And there's a couple of small discrepancies in here that I'd like to get rid of. That sun flare there being one of them. And everything else is looking okay. There's one there as well. I'll just check the waves, and one there. So I'm going to show you how I correct them as well. So I'm going to right click and edit in Photoshop. I'm going to do a straight edit here. I'm not going to open it as a smart object. And this will boot Photoshop up. And there we go. So right, we know that there is a couple of discrepancies here. I'll go and start with the quicker ones first, just for the purposes of this video. So what I can do here is there's 2 or 3 different ways of doing it, but what I can do here is I can just copy this here using the selection tool, and then just go Control C, Control V, or Command C and Command V if you're on a Mac. And then using the move tool, I'm just going to move it into place around to about there, and you can see I've taken that bit in. I'm just going to erase that, so that's just E, whether you're on Mac or PC, and I'm just going to erase that bit out. If I've been very lucky there, it's matched up. So that's one done, and I can't see any discrepancies, so I'm going to blend that into the layer below. Control or Command E, and it drops back into that layer. Next one I'm going to do is this one here, and I'm going to try the same thing again. So I'm going to do quite a selection here, just to about there. The reason I've taken this one is so that I've got room to play with that, and I also noticed that there's banding coming down here, so I'm aware of that and didn't want to get into that. So what I'm going to do, Control C or Command C, edit copy, and then paste. And now I'm going to move this. So that's Command or Control T. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it slightly, just to about there. And then I'm going to erase this bit, because that's just taking a bit too much for me. So I'm going to go back into E there and just take that out, just to make sure it's gone. Right. I'm now going to move this down. I need it to match up. So if I match it there, I need this to match in here. So one of the things that I can do with this is I can go into Edit, Transform, and Warp. And you'll know that in the new version of Photoshop, you have different tools within the warp. I'm just going to use the basic warp for this. And I'm just going to do that. There's a slight bend there. I'll just grab that and move it back to about there. Click OK. So there's another one blended in. That's not too bad at that. I'll click E, make my brush a bit bigger, and erase some in there and there. And that just helps merge it in ever so slightly. Again, Control E, blend it into that layer. And last but not least for us is this here. A couple of ways to try this. Let's go in and try that straight away, just to see. That's it, it's worked. I'm not going to take any more from that, but as you will notice in here, when I've been shooting this one, my focus has changed, and that's a photographer's issue, not a software issue. You can see it's sharp there. I must have changed my focusing point when I shot that, but I'll leave it at that for the purposes of this. Control 0 to zoom back out. Okay, next stage for me, I'm going to leave them up there until I come back into Lightroom. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into Filter, Skylum Software, Luminar 4, and then we're going to bring all the image together. Okay, so that's us now in Luminar 4, and we're going to get in for a couple of edits here. Straight away, I'm going to get in and adjust the sky, just to see what happens with it. If I push it too far, it goes too blue for me. I'm not so keen on that, although sometimes it works for images. It's just me. I'm still going to leave the saturation in this one, but not just as much. AI accent, which will lift the entire image to around about there. So already you can see the difference just with two sliders. And that's quite a nice difference. AI structure. This is only going to apply to down here once I edit it. And I'm going to bring that up a bit. Just flick that on and off just to see. So already you can see the difference that that's made. I quite like actually what's happening up here. Not so keen in here. So I might take some of that out. And to take some of that out, what I'm going to do is use the brush and I'm going to paint it into the areas that I want it to be in. And it's quite a lot of the areas I want. So I'm just going to paint in there, down here. Again, doing this quite liberally. I might get away with it's defocus, it's not in focus, but I might get away with sorting that bit out there. Take it over here. And I quite liked what was happening here as well. So we'll just do that just to see. So let's go for a edit mask, turn that back off. Let's go for a before and after. Yep, I could live with that. Quite happy there. Colour I'll leave just now. I'm going to get in denoise because it's ISO 200 and it was shot with the Mavic Pro 2, so the noise is there. So if I even move it to there, you can see that there is a tiny bit of noise. Well, not a tiny bit of noise, there is quite a bit of noise there, but that is just to do with the size of the 1-inch sensor. So I'm going to take the luminosity noise down slightly. Again, take it down too much, and we don't get a nice effect on the image. So everything in moderation. So I'm going to take it down to about 3 or 4. That again I can live with, and the colour denoise as well. I'll just check my before and after. Yep, quite happy with that. What I'm doing is I'm looking in this area here where there is hardly any contrast, just to see the difference. And that's smoothing that out quite nicely. So let's go back here. Next thing, landscape enhancer. And we have the dehaze in here, but we've already dehazed it. To add a further dehaze might work, it might not. I'll just flick that on and off. It's darkening that quite a bit there. And it's having a nice effect up here. So I'm going to pull that back. I'm just going to add it in subtly. Golden hour. Now this is the one that we're going to play with. As you can see, it's definitely been shot in the golden hour. So I'm going to push this one quite a bit, just to watch what's happening here. And of course I could go in and I could add a radial filter just to that one area, but again, that's too much. It's too oversaturated. So what I'm going to do is just pull it in slightly and then turn it on and off just to look at the effects. And that actually might still be too much. I'm going to take that down to about 10. Let's see how that is. Yep, that's nice. It's just catching everything up here, but not too far. So again, that one's done for me as well. Next thing, details enhancer. Small details in this area, possibly in the sky. Let's see. If we push that quite a bit, it's nice to see what's going on. So I'm going to flick that off. If you watch down this area, detail enhancer, it worked really well down here, but not so well up here. I'll flick that back on and off so that you can see. So with that and with the mask, I now have the option of painting in certain areas. So I'm going to turn it on and off and look over the image starting from here down to here. So I'm not looking at the sky, maybe this area, but the rest of it I'm only working along here. So that's just how my eyes are going to move across this image when I turn the details enhancer on and off. And what I'm also going to do, just for the better detail, is look in there. Yep, I'm quite happy with what it does. So it's now a case of editing the mask and painting it into the areas that I want. The opacity is only 50%. I don't want it to come in as full as that. Maybe some areas I will. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to paint in there, all around here, over the castle itself, and up here. And then I'll take a look at it to see what it's like. I'm not going to put detail into the sea at all, but I may put some up here. But if I do put any up here, I'm going to turn the opacity back down. So I'm going to flick that on and off. And even at 50%, you can see quite a difference there. I'll just turn that off and I'll zoom in here just to let you see. And that's subtle, and it's subtle enough to be noticed. Especially for an image like this. Again, quite happy. I'm not going to affect any of the rest of the images. The clouds I'm happy with as they are. So for me, now I'm going to get back to the colour and I'm going to play around with the blues. I may increase some of the yellows, but we'll wait and see. So I'm looking at this blue area here just to make sure it complements the rest of the image. So straight away I'm going to go in, I'm going to pull back the saturation of the blue, and I'm going to be quite drastic with it. And I'm going to flick that on and off. For me, I prefer the subtler blue, so I'm going to go halfway in here. So that I've still got that rich saturation in the blue, but not just as rich. Right, I'm going to get in and look at the yellows and the oranges now, because we've got quite a bit of orange going along these clouds. So let's go into the orange. Let's push the saturation in the orange. And we may not be able to deal with it in this. So let me check. Let me just go for the luminance. Too bright and we start to get artifacts in here. So I'm going to take it to +1. And quite happy with that. So that's the image already from where we brought it in. After a couple of corrections in Photoshop and then into Luminar. And the reason I went into Photoshop to do those corrections is that's just my workflow. I prefer doing it that way. I can do it in here depending what the image is, but for this one, it works better for me in here. In Photoshop, sorry. That's us. I'm going to apply this and then go into the last part of the process. Right, so that's us now back into Photoshop. And what I would normally do, one of the steps I didn't do that I would normally do, before I take it into Luminar, I normally copy the layer up, but I haven't done it in this one. So, last but not least, I'm going to copy the layer up now for my final adjustments. Control or Command-J on the keyboard. And then I'm going to go into Camera Raw Filter. So this is me now using 4 different techniques to bring one image together, and that's the way it should be. You can do everything entirely in Luminar if you want, or if you have access to all different softwares, you can go in and do whatever suits your workflow, and that's the way it should be. These are your images, how you want to create them. In here, what I'm going to do is just add a couple of subtle highlights in here, and I'm going to add them with a radial filter, and as you know, Luminar has them, so you can actually refine this entire workflow into Luminar except for the panorama, blending of the images together and merging them to make a panorama. I'm going to add a couple of subtle radial filters in this as well, and as I said, you could do this entirely in Luminar if you want. So the first thing I'm going to do is radial filter, and I'm going to just put subtle highlights in here. I'm not going to use the brush at all for this area because you get a better fall off with the radial filters. Something I've always used as well, so I'm quite comfortable with them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the exposure here, but only by around that. That for me there, nearly 1/3 of a stop might be okay. I'm going to turn off the overlay to a C. So if I take that back, 20. There, right, I'm going to add another one because the settings are already held. And I'm going to do that. That's actually quite nice what's happened there because it's drawing us in. And there's one along here as well. So I'm going to turn the overlay back on because you'll see where that last one went there. But this one I'm going to turn the overlay back on because you don't have control over rotation if the overlay is not showing. So I'm going to turn that back on and I'm going to rotate it slightly, take it up to around there, bring it back down just into place, and then I am going to turn it off and just check it because I reckon there 20 is just too much. Let's go for 15. Because we don't want that suddenly to pop out, and it is at the moment. I'm going to take it back to 10. Yep, can live with 10. Over here, I'm going to add a 10 in there as well, and as you'll notice, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a 10 in here as well, because we're wanting everything to lead you in. Your eyes, you're always drawn to the lightest part, so everything's leading you in. I don't know if I'm focusing on that one too much, but I may remove that one. So 10 in there, yep, quite happy. I may put 1 down here as well, just so that the trees are helping us and being accentuated there as well. Small one in there, maybe 1 in there just to pick the highlights out in that. Okay, that for me so far is looking good, and we're nearly done with this. any parts that I want for to be erased, I can, and I'll just select that because there's certain parts in there I want erased. I'm going to turn on the mask options here, and then I'm going to get into the eraser, and I'm going to decrease the eraser size just to around there so we've got a softer edge on it, and I'm going to take out some of the shadows in the trees so that that tenth of a stop isn't affecting them. And that way I can erase them. So that's another one. I'll turn the mask options off. Yeah, quite happy with that. Right. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to accentuate some of these clouds in here. So how I'm going to do that is with the brush. And I'm going to take the brush size down to around there. And I'm going to turn the mask options on. And I'm just going to paint. That's too small actually. I'm going to take the brush size up 1. So just around there. And I'm going to... So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint in here, just to about there. I'm not going to touch anything else just now, just to see how this works. So that's the only areas I'm going to affect with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the contrast slightly in there. If I lift the highlights, we get too much of a draw, so I'm going to just do them subtly. And I'm also going to add a tiny bit of saturation. I'm only going to add about 2. And I'm quite happy with how that's turned out so far. So I'm going to click OK. This is us now back in Photoshop after a few edits in the Camera Raw filter. So this is before Camera Raw. This is after Camera Raw. Subtle, but effective in this case. If I didn't like this area here, and you can see it is just a subtle change, but if I didn't like it, I could create a mask, and this is the reason I always create 2 layers. So I apologise for not doing it in the first place. I can choose the brush, black brush, opacity 100, and I can paint that out. Now, you won't really notice any difference now, but if I turn the mask off and turn that layer on and off, you'll see the difference. So that's it. That's us. We've been through the entire edit. As I say, this white up here, that's just annoying me ever so slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go File, Save. That will go back into the Lightroom directly. And that's us back in Lightroom. So I can now crop that here if I wanted to. Just take it down to around there. And that takes care of that. So that's it now in full screen after an entire workflow. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully you enjoyed watching my workflow when I'm putting images like this together. It depends on the image itself what workflow you're going to do. It's not a one size fits all to get the final image. This, as I said at the beginning, I could have done entirely in Luminar, except again for the photo merge, which I do in Lightroom. I'm preferring Lightroom's photo merge to Photoshop's at the moment. It just seems to be doing a better job for the images I take, so that's why I've used that one. It's not to say that Photoshop's one is bad in any way at all. It's just my preference at the moment. Perhaps the next image I do, Photoshop will do a better job of it, so we'll just wait and see. When it comes to workflows, you will find different tips and techniques from many different photographers and editors that you will take. You'll steal a wee bit here and steal a wee bit there. That becomes your workflow. And as software evolves, as in this case Luminar has with its AI technology, as software evolves, your editing ability and skill will evolve. So hopefully you got something from that, even if it was just killing time just to watch somebody else editing. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you'd like to check out some more videos in the channel below, and if you're currently not a subscriber, please consider subscribing because that would be greatly appreciated. Remember, stay safe, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.